say I'd like to, excuse me, I'd like to call this House to order, this public house. I'm delighted to say, proposing the motion, that the CPO's main priority should not be cost reduction, is Mr. Jason Busch. Jason is the founder, editor and driving force behind Spend Matters, which you all, I know, read avidly. He has a career in procurement, consulting, software, free markets, Ariba, and he also has a very young third son, which is the reason he's come over this week, to get a bit of sleep. So, proposing the motion, Mr. Jason Busch.
Thank you, Peter. Where I come from, if you're president of the country, it's perfectly acceptable to use a teleprompter at every possible use. And given the fact I'm a bit underslept, I decided to script out a few comments, which I know in union debating style is not very appropriate. But if you will bear with me, I do plan to read just a little bit as I propose a motion. He goes, "It is my true conviction that cost reduction, as we know it, has worked its way down the list of procurement priorities. Now, those who know me might find it surprising that I propose this motion. After all, I got my start in the early years, in the 90s, working at a company called Free Markets, where I did, among other things, reverse auctions. And some might argue that reverse auctions are the most blunt instrument we have in beating down suppliers to drive savings. And I'm still a big believer in them. So I believe in strategic sourcing, I believe in auctions. Yet at the same time, I believe that cost reduction has moved down the list of priorities. I've also learned why striving for cost reduction as the CPO's top priority in the current environment we face is the equivalent in U.S. political history of Richard Nixon debating John F. Kennedy. Has anybody looked at the Nixon-Kennedy debates? Okay. If we look at what happened in the 60s, it's a fascinating study. Nixon came up short of the mark, not because of a lack of skill and preparation, but because of an inability to adapt his rhetorical skills to the television era. It was a new time in history. Indeed, those who listened to the most famous Nixon-Kennedy debate on the radio suggested Nixon won. And if you haven't seen this, I would suggest you check out the Mad Men video. It's a fabulous television series. But if you look at those who watched it on TV, it was clear that Kennedy walked away the victor, and it's clear who won that election in the end. So even though Mr. Nixon would go on to become one of the most famous crooks in the history of my country, his experience losing this debate and the subsequent election to Kennedy is really a great metaphor for how CPOs and heads of procurement have failed to adapt to the current environment and will come up short if they execute perfectly in the ways they were trained, i.e. cost reduction alone is not enough today. There's a number of reasons I'm steadfast in this conviction. Perhaps most important is that by focusing on cost reduction as a core strategy, we may drive initial savings, but we're likely to increase our costs over time, especially in today's environment. I'm not sure how many of you drove in today and saw the cost of gasoline or petroleum, as you call it here. I'm not sure how many plan to buy shirts for their kids this summer, t-shirts, which are going to go up in cost because cotton has increased roughly 3x. I don't know others who may have looked at other commodity prices and general inflation in the UK and other countries. But we're living in a very different environment today, where if we simply focus on beating down suppliers, they'll get back at us. And I'm going to talk about why in a minute. So it's my experience that a priority focus on cost reduction is synonymous with asking suppliers to reduce their price in a zero-sum manner. Now in a buyer's market, we can usually get away with this. I won't claim to have done it in the past, but it's often possible. But inevitably, such a model comes up short over time, especially when suppliers have more power, or commodity markets have moved against us. So if I could share a few anecdotes from my own experience here to bring out this fact. So I worked at Free Markets, which was a pioneer in this concept of strategic sourcing and reverse auctions. I was there for roughly 5 years. And I oversaw a number of different sourcing events, categories, and clients. And we would often claim that we achieved 20–25% savings from creating a competitive market environment. And that was true. We achieved that on paper. But if you look at what we were able to implement in reality, 60–70% at best, and that was initial savings. Over time, suppliers got back at us in lots of ways, or got back at our clients. So one example I'll just quickly refer to is indirect sourcing of office products. Now in the United States, you can compete Staples and Office Max against each other, and I'm not sure the UK and European markets as well. But in the US, you have multiple suppliers, even though one is dominant. But what happens over time is that suppliers get smart. They get back at you unless you partner with them. So we'll give you 20% savings on that stapler or that printer or that notebook computer, but
oh, by the way, next year that SKU is going to change. We're not going to tell you that. But when the SKU changes, the cost is going to go up. But since it's in my system as a previous SKU, I'm going to pay the new price, because I'm assuming it's a better model. Well, that erosion from savings has just occurred. Global sourcing is another example. I've spent many years of my life focused on direct material sourcing from China, India, and other markets. My wife is a former metals trader who's bought in many countries and sold to other regions of the world. And it used to be there was great arbitrage in global sourcing. You could buy from India and sell to Europe or Israel or other countries in aluminum and steel and other products. But what's happened as the internet era has completely come upon us is a real decline in the ability to drive savings in that manner. And a lot of companies went to China in the past couple of years thinking they drive 30 to 50% savings. And in reality, if you look at the cost of that savings, it's been huge. So focused on cost reduction has in many cases led to an increase in prices as labor rates have gone up, as currencies have changed. And if we look at the societal toll of these decisions, from employing suppliers who will use child labor, who will cut corners on quality and audits, we see the cost of these simple cost decisions. So I believe we must turn our priorities to broader areas in procurement these days. Supplier and risk management strategies in their totality, not simply as an immediate outcome. Got to put down. I'm not used to doing this with beer in my hand. Or negotiations or a saving mandate matter. And in doing so, we must drive greater impact in financial terms in a more sustainable manner while materially reducing the risk to our organizations. So for those in government, this will mean playing a more mature role in balancing budgets, both in the UK and the US. And for those in the private sector, it will mean focusing on longer-term shareholder value rather than near-term Russian savings roulette. So on the subject of gambling and cost reduction, I'll quickly share a number of examples. In the spirit of 2 more minutes, okay. So if we look at kind of a classic example in North America, and it might have happened over here, Chinese drywall. So we have a company go to China to buy particle board, it's not particle board, but drywall to put up on the walls. It's a lot cheaper, 50% cheaper. But a few years later, we learned that it emits noxious fumes, which rot copper pipes in the US, and cause many lawsuits to the builders and homeowners and others who've sold their properties based on it. There's other examples I won't leave you with now. We can chase the origins of losers of different examples for organizations who focus just on cost reduction as their primary objective to a number of areas. But today's environment is more complicated. We've got supply risks, supplier bankruptcy possibilities. I mentioned commodity inflation. We've got great demand volatility. Are the economies recovering or not? We've got reduced capacity. Heck, we've got North Africa and the Middle East in revolt right now. So if we're focusing just on cost reduction, how do we deal with the necessary issues that might arise if the Suez Canal is not passable in global sourcing? We've got the weather impact as well of current commodity prices. Cotton has gone up over 3 times because of weather-related issues. You're about to hear an imposing argument from an esteemed professor who I will suggest, who will posit his central mission is reducing costs. Yet I would like to ask him in advance if a company like Heinz is better off focusing on hammering suppliers to reduce the raw material, packaging, labels, and other related costs of this bottle of ketchup. This is a story in creative procurement, and I'm saying this as somebody who's contributed to huge savings from just beating up suppliers over the years. Does anybody know why this is a piece of looking at the history of cost negotiation and working with suppliers? Okay, so it's a flat top bottle. Put it down on the ground. Thank you. It balances. If you use this bottle of ketchup, you use between 20 and 30% more ketchup. So Heinz sells more ketchup. This didn't come from a supplier, or it didn't come from Heinz. The innovation for this upside-down packaging came from a supplier. Now let me ask you, if you beat up that supplier, put them through an auction, put them through a sourcing exercise, would they share with you how to do this? No way. This came from partnering. And I think in today's environment, especially as the cost of tomatoes in that bottle, spices and everything else is going through the roof, we've got to think about it. So let me close. My colleagues, please do not take my arguments in a manner that suggests we should not prioritize cost reduction as a priority. We should. I probably know as much about anyone about the different formats of negotiation we can deploy online and off to do so. But we must consider cost reduction in a broader context, alongside a range of new and old priorities alike, lest we fail to make the move into a new era and become a Nixonian figure inside our own organizations. Thank you.
Thank you.